another face in the crowd in this Bellwether town.
These three paintings were all painted by inmates. They were members. Bedwash was a member of the Native Sons. I'm not sure if Anishinaabe was a member. He was definitely an Indigenous man who was incarcerated there. This one was painted by Freddie Taylor, who was also incarcerated there. He was there in '76. He's the last surviving founding member of the Native Sons. But he painted this and donated it to Urban Park Guelph. You'll see it was painted in '23. So he painted that. That was a riff on the original Native Sons logo. Right. And he painted that for us as part of our efforts to raise the profile of that site. And Richard Bedwash studied for a year under Morrisseau. Well, the Bedwash story is interesting in and of itself, just as an isolated snapshot, because he studied under Morrisseau, but he'd never had an exhibit on his own until he was, use the word, the Hollywood word is discovered by Judith Nasby. She was the curator of the Macdonald Stewart Art Gallery at the University of Guelph. She was tipped off to a talented young man who, at the time, I think he was actually in the Wellington County Detention Centre, and then he got transferred into the Correctional Centre. And Judith went down and actually commissioned him to paint 19 paintings that are still today owned by the University of Guelph. And the university, because of all this renewed interest, the current curator, Shona McCabe, just launched a Bedwash exhibit last year. The other fellow, this gentleman right here, is Cliff Summers. And Cliff was the president of the Native Sons in 1978 and 79. And then he became an employee of the provincial government as a Native liaison officer, and he worked going into prisons throughout Ontario to be a liaison for the Native Sons between the Indigenous inmates and the administration and the guards. So, and he's been very supportive of the Urban Park project as well, been invaluable to helping us understand the history there. Some urban explorers broke in 2021, and they took video. Yeah. So that's not that long ago. As far as I know, they're still there. Yeah. We've had communications with the government about trying to have them saved and or restored, and they've come back generally and said there's been a variety of reasons not to do it, but none of them have come back and said, sorry, they're not there anymore. Government claims on why they can't be recovered or brought out, that's a different story. One of the complaints was that first they said, well, we don't know who did them, so they're not really that significant. And I wrote to the Minister of Infrastructure, and I said, actually, we're finding out who did them. And we know Richard Bedwash painted at least one, probably two of the paintings. Mm-hmm. And even since then, I discovered the identity of another inmate who painted it. I've heard people say it's just graffiti, and that sort of, it's just a prisoner graffiti. But I mean, now knowing the significance of this art and how it's become, so valuable, and culturally and financially. Well, not only that, I mean, across the board, that's true. In this setting, in this situation, you're talking about, Indigenous expressions of Indigenous spirituality by imprisoned men, right? That's huge. I recently referred to the Native Sons as both a symptom of colonialism, but also a cure. It was a self-effacing cure. It was a way of dealing with the effects of the residential schools and the 60 Scoop and the Indian Day schools. So it's complicated, but that also makes those artworks even more significant, I think, than buying a Richard Bedwash painting on this from a vendor. Bellwether.